last week, we concluded by discussing the Indo-European homeland issue and where it is. We discussed three major theories. Maria Gimbutas's theory that puts it north of the Caucasus Mountains, kind of between the Black Sea and Caspian Sea, in the Russian steppes. We discussed Colin Renfrew's theory that it was somewhere in eastern Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and then the I can never remember how to pronounce his name. Gamkrelidze and Ivanov hypothesis, which places it in Armenia, south of the Caucasus Mountains. These five books, which are all in Indo-European. This one's primarily dealing with poetry and myth, okay, in the Indo-European languages, so it doesn't go as much into the homeland issue as some of these others. Beeks's Comparative Indo-European Linguistics and Introduction does to some extent, but again, it's primarily focused on language. But Philip Baldy's An Introduction to the Indo-European Languages does talk about the homeland. This one, Oxford Introduction to Proto-Indo-European and the Proto-Indo-European World, goes quite a bit into it. I forgot I've got one more book in my bag. And to some extent, I think it would be fair to say that this book is almost entirely about the homeland issue. Okay, this is David Anthony's The Horse, the Wheel, and Language, How Bronze Age Writers from the Eurasian Steppes Shaped the Modern World. And he's got several chapters that kind of focus on that, in case you're interested in it. Chapter 1's kind of, background stuff. Chapter 2, How to Reconstruct a Dead Language. Chapter 3, Language and Time, the Last Speakers of Proto-Indo-European. Chapter 4, Language and Time, Part 2, Wool, Wheels, and Proto-Indo-European. That is, he's starting to get into the archaeology and show how the domestication of sheep, okay, and the invention of the wheel lead to our understanding about Indo-European. Chapter 5 is about the Indo-European homeland, okay? And he's got it divided into 5 sections. Problems with the concept of the homeland, because the concept implies kind of a single locality. And what he argues in here is it's not a single locality. You have these quote-unquote Proto-Indo-European speakers who arise in somewhat differing locations, but they are, let's say, geographically limited. That is, the Indo-Europeans don't spread out. If you look at that map right there, blow it up a little bit. The Indo-Europeans don't arise as a quote-unquote single group all over in this area, okay? There are elements of Indo-European cultures. Let me see if this thing will work now, the pointer. Nope. Over here by the Dnieper River, over here by the Ural, over here by Volga, over here by the Don, all the way over in this area, okay? And they're all pretty much speaking Proto-Indo-European, okay? More than likely. Finding the homeland, ecology and environment, that's what we were talking about last week in terms of looking at vocabulary and what vocabulary for specific words that are cognate in all the languages can tell us. Finding the homeland, economic and social setting is the third section in that chapter. Finding the homeland, Uralic and Caucasian connections, that is, how is Indo-European related to those other language groups. Because the language of the Caucasus Mountains between the Black Sea and Caspian isn't Indo-European. Okay? It kind of sits right in the middle, almost, of Indo-European, but it's not Indo-European. Okay? Uralic also is not an Indo-European language, but it has some close similarities in some aspects, just as there are some similarities with Semitic languages, okay, in Indo-European. One branch of historical linguistics has as its goal to try to discover the so-called mother tongue, meaning the one tongue from which all languages possibly derive. Okay, I believe the name for that is Nostratic. Okay, and it's a positive language because there are some words in all language families that appear to be cognative. For example, water. You would think things that are necessary for survival, okay, would probably survive as the languages develop and spread, etc., over time. Okay? So, if you're interested in Indo-European and you want to borrow any of these, you are welcome to. Let's go back to comparative linguistics. The chart that I handed out, table of Indo-European sound correspondences on one side, and on the other side, it just says historical sound changes by languages. Okay. The side that says table of Indo-European sound correspondences, this comes from the, it's not Merriam-Webster, I think it's Random House, Dictionary of Indo-European Roots. We used to have a copy over here somewhere. I think somebody lifted it though. Which might be out of print. I know one time when I taught this class, either 2 or 4 years ago, it had been out of print for a while, and then it came back into print. But this is at the end of that little book. It's fairly small, right? Done by a scholar named Calvert Watkins. And what this is showing you is just what it says at the top. The correspondences between initial consonants in the principal older Indo-European languages. For example, if you look down the columns, okay, or look across the rows, I should say, you have Indo-European, the next language is Hittite, then Tocharian, Sanskrit, Avestan, etc. Right? Where Indo-European has a p sound. Right? What it shows you is what these other languages also have, okay, when Indo-European has a p at the beginning of a word. So Hittite also had a p. Tocharian had the same, Sanskrit, Avestan, Old Persian, all the way until you get over to Armenian. And then notice Armenian, the p sound becomes a h. We don't know why. That is, for any of these changes, we don't know why these changes occurred. Okay? All we can say is they did. Because in every instance where, leave Indo-Iranian out, Indo-European out for the moment, in every instance where all of these other languages before Armenian that's included on here have a P at the beginning of a word, Armenian consistently has an H. All right? Notice, Greek has a P, Latin has a P, Old Irish has, I don't remember what that asterisk stands for. Germanic then, what happens? Becomes a F sound, an F, okay? The letter used to represent the sound. Give me an example. You can probably name at least one example right off the top of your head where, let's use not Indo-European or Iranian or Avestan or Persian, but use Latin. Where Latin has a word that begins with p, and in English that word begins with f. Pardon? Pater. Old English or English, father. If you check your horoscope, or if you're into astrology, you might be familiar with the sign of the, in English, fish. In Latin, Pisces, or Pisces, as it is in Latin. Okay? Two little examples. You might see a sign on a highway that says, no pedestrians. Ped, pod, P-O-D. If you have a problem with your foot, you don't go to a foot doctor. You go to a podiatrist. Okay? So again, P-F there. And then you can go on over. Notice all the Germanic languages, okay, have that, with the exception of Middle Dutch. Okay? So that's a straight sound correspondence that occurs among all these languages. So where most Indo-European languages have a p sound, two of the groups change it. Armenian changes it to a h, and Germanic changes it to a f. Look at the next one. T. So where Hittite, Tocharian, Sanskrit, Avestan, Old Persian, Old Church Slavonic, and Lithuanian, Greek, Latin, and Old Irish all have t, and it's called unvoiced. Okay? What do some of the other languages have? Notice, Armenian also is making a change. It has a th, like the th in thigh, not the th. Okay? It's the smooth or unvoiced th sound. Well, and then you see the same thing in Germanic. Okay? That doesn't indicate that Germanic and Armenian are related. It just indicates that these two languages, for some reason, they have a slight differentiation compared to all the other Indo-European languages. Well, we could talk about the Old High German, duh. Okay? That's something that occurs later. There's a sound change that occurs between Gothic and Old English and Old Norse and Old High German that we could go into later. What other sounds? Look at the k sound. Now this is a really important one. Okay? Hittite, Tocharian, both have k at the beginning of a word. Sanskrit, however, makes that sh. Avestan makes that a sibilant. Okay? Old Persian changes the k to th. Old Church Slavonic follows what Avestan has with a s. Lithuanian has a s. Armenian has a s. Greek has a k. Latin has a, notice, the spelling there is a C. It's k. Okay? And then Germanic has a h. Okay. The reason why this one is important is it's because of this sound change, okay, where the languages primarily divide into two groups, those with the k and those with the h, okay? This is under point 5 here on the notes. In Proto-Indo-European, the word for 100 was probably something like kuntom. Okay? Notice on the notes, it has an asterisk in front of it. That means that word doesn't actually survive anywhere in written form. Okay? That is reconstructed language. So whenever you're reading in your textbook, you pick up an article to work on your paper or whatever, and you see a word with an asterisk in front of it, that means it's reconstructed. There is no attested form of that. You can't find that inscribed on a rock anywhere. Okay? The way they determine kumtom is by looking at the word 100. Okay? I've got another book in my office I could bring in and talk about. You take that word hundred and you look at its cognates in all the Indo-European languages. Okay? And what you start to see is, okay, the Germanic languages have that sound at the beginning, but the others, most of them, have either a k or a s. And the n tone is material that comes later that we won't get into a great deal. Okay, so cum tone means 100. The Latin Avestan cognates. Okay, notice Avestan here. What's it do? S. Okay, Latin has the k sound. In Avestan and in Old Church Slavonic, Lithuanian, Armenian, etc., that word kumtom becomes satem. In Persian, it's shatem. Okay? From Indo-European kumtom. In Latin, that word is kintum. Okay? So, satem, kintum. And if you were to take a map, can we use that one? No, we can't. We can use that one. If you take a map of Europe, like this one, and look at some of these languages, because some of these languages we can place a little bit on the map, like Old Church Slavonic. Okay? That's up here. All right. Lithuanian. Where's Lithuania? It's in the Baltics, right over in this area. Okay. Greek is down here. Notice where Greek is on the chart. Greek is K. Okay. Latin is K. Latin is obviously over here in Italy. The Germanic languages have a H sound. Okay. So, if you were to take a line and draw it roughly from up here and come almost straight down like this, you've got a pretty good divisor or dividing line between the kintum and the satem branches. The kintum, those with the k sound, okay, are all to the west of that line. The satem are all to the east of that line, okay, with one major exception. Tocharian. Tocharian is a kintum language. Okay? I don't think Tocharian, it's not on that one. It's not on this one. Wait, yes it is. Yeah, Tocharian's the second one next to Hittite, between Hittite and Sanskrit. Now, Hittite, would be over in this area. So the line isn't quite right, which is why most scholars, they don't use the kintum satem or kumtom satem dividing line in terms of evidence for scholarly articles. It's a nice kind of visual divider when you do it this way. However, because, again, most of the languages fall on either side of this kind of imaginary line. Again, except for Tocharian, which is way over here, literally in Mongolia. Okay? We might talk a little bit about Tocharian later. Go back down. Okay. So we'll talk about these branches in just a moment. Let me come back up here because we've been talking about the sound changes. Okay, so these are all so far what are called unvoiced stops, okay, which we talked about kind of the first night of class. We'll skip the qu sounds. Okay? Look at the next group, the voiced stops. So the unvoiced stops, okay? The voiced stops, b, d, g. Right? What happens? Notice, what is posited in Indo-European as beginning with b. Hittite, Tocharian, both have p. As does Armenian, as do all the Germanic languages. But Sanskrit, Avestan, Old Persian, Old Church Slavonic, Lithuanian, Greek, Latin, and Old Irish all have b. So where a Latin word would begin with b, Germanic should begin with p. Some of you women probably have with you a purse. Okay? Notice, the Germanic has p. If you were referring to that purse in Latin, it wouldn't be purse. It'd be the bursa. You can go down and pay your bills in Cope, and you go to the business office, or what is sometimes, in some college campuses, is called the bursar's office. The bursar is where the money is kept, supposedly. Okay? Next one. Indo-European, duh. Notice, Hittite, Tocharian. Tocharian's kind of funny there. Armenian, and then the Germanic languages all have, in place of a duh, a t. Okay. Now, what these kinds of relationships probably show is that there is some closer affinity between Hittite, Armenian, and the Germanic languages. Because we've seen now in this group two similarities, okay, in these two voiced stops. Look at the g sound, and it follows through there as well. Okay? So whether that means that they were neighbor speakers in this Proto-Indo-European group, or something like that, they're somehow more closely related than are these other groups. Okay? The next group are what are called voiced aspirates. Bah. So you get the ba, but then you get the afterwards. Duh, gah. Okay? Why these three sets of consonants? Why not the whole listing? Okay? Because these three sets are going to be part of what we're going to talk about as Grimm's Law. These are the important, these are the major sound changes, okay, that occur. Back up to 4.2, verb endings in Indo-European languages. If you read your chapter in your book, you saw the endings on pages 72 and 73, okay, where you get Sanskrit as kind of the model language. Sanskrit's one of the oldest surviving Indo-European languages. We have text back to 1000 BC. But on page 72, you have Bharami, Bharsi, Bharti, Bharmas, Bhartha, Bharnti. Okay? The mi, si, ti, mas, tha, inti, okay, are giving you a pretty good indication of those verb inflections. Put that in modern English, as they have off to the side. I bear. What kind of inflection do we put on the verb for I? None. English doesn't inflect that verb anymore. Okay? If it were Latin, look down below, it's fair o. The O is the inflection. Okay? If you see the word credo, C-R-E-D-O. It means I believe or I declare. Okay? Baharasi, thou bearest, or modern English, you bear. Why is Paulus and Algio using thou bearest? Because the C and the est are related. It's only in the last 300-400 years we've dropped off that est ending, okay, for that second person singular. Bharati, he, she, beareth. The T, the F are related. The ETH actually can be traced back to earliest form of Old English, to Gothic, okay, and then ultimately back to Indo-European. Right? But again, if you put all that in its today's language, bear. Okay, we have to throw the I, the separate word, in to show that we're bearing. But you bear, notice there's no inflectional ending on it. He, she, it bears. Okay? Bears. And that heirs, that S ending, comes from Old Norse. Okay? That's a change that occurs in a branch of Germanic in kind of the Middle Ages. All right? So you have these verb endings that, as time goes on, this happens to all languages, endings of words start to drop off or change. Often what happens is they change first and then they start to drop off. American English, how do we pronounce this word or this word? Secretary. 1, 2, 3, 4 syllables. How about this one?
Library.
Laboratory. Okay. Notice what we're doing here. We're eliding a syllable. If you've ever watched the classic Frankenstein with Boris Karloff, how does he pronounce it? The laboratory. La, bor, a, tor, e. Okay? How do Brits pronounce this? Tree. You go to Canterbury, even though it's spelled like that. Canterbury. Okay. You go to I'm trying to remember how it's spelled. Yeah. Middle Ages, it's spelled like this. Shrewsbury, it's pronounced Shrewsbury. 2 syllables. Shrewsbury. From Shrewsbury. Okay? So you start to see, as time goes on, ends of syllables or ends of words start to drop off. This is especially true for the Germanic languages, which we'll talk about why in just a moment. Okay? 8 cases of nouns in Indo-European. What do we mean by cases? Modern English, when you're writing a sentence, what's the main thing in the sentence? What's the sentence about? The subject. Okay? That's the nominative case. It's the thing being named. Okay? What else do we have? So the subject, the boy. Okay, then we're going to have a verb. Boy does something. Let's say he gives. He gives a verb to another one of these. What case is that? What is this boy doing? He's receiving. So what's that called? That's the accusative case. He's the one being accused, as it were. Okay? But what if this boy gives the boy the ball? That changes it. Because then what's happening? What's receiving the action of the verb? The ball is. And it's being given to the boy. Okay? So the boy then turns into what's called the dative case. Okay? But notice, in each of those, the boy, the ball. What determines meaning in that sentence? The order of words. Syntax. Syntax is all important in modern English. Because if you changed it to that, what kind of sentence do you have? Nonsense. That is, grammatically it's perfect. Semantically, it's nonsense. How can a ball give anything? Okay. So, cases tell you the part of speech, okay, the grammatical function of those items. And look at how many there are in Indo-European. There are 8. Okay, in Latin, there's really 5 that you have to focus on. In Greek, if I remember correctly, there's 6. Okay. Pages 74 in your textbook. Nominative, okay? Subject of a sentence. Vocative, the person being addressed. If you've ever read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, as Caesar is being stabbed, he says to Brutus, "Et tu, Brute?" The Brute, the E ending, indicates it's vocative. He's calling out Brutus. Right? We don't really have vocative case in English anymore, though we can and should indicate it by punctuation. Like you're sending an email to somebody, and you start a sentence, and then you want to put their name in. I'm telling you, Ted, the comma, Ted, comma, those commas are indicating vocative case. You're calling that individual out. Right? Accusative, direct object, they saw me. Genitive, possessor or source. Shakespeare's play. Dative, indirect object, recipient, give her a hand. Ablative, what is separated? He abstained from it, is the example given. Locative, the place where it happened. We stayed home, or we went to the store. Okay? Instrumental, that means by which. We went to the store in the car. Okay? But notice, in modern English, we went to the store. To the store isn't locative. What kind of phrase is that? What's it called? It's a prepositional phrase. Okay? The preposition to, it's a, notice, preposition. It comes before that noun phrase, the store. So even if we went to the store in the car, yeah, you could say in the car is instrumental because it's saying how you get there, but it's not strictly speaking. Why not? Because we don't put an ending on the word car to indicate that, as they would in Latin. Latin had an instrumental. I take that back. Latin did have all of these. Old English had all of these except for ablative and locative. Had all the others. Okay. What cases do we really have in modern English? And by cases, I mean cases that indicate inflectional changes, an addition or a change to the form of the word. Genitive. How do we show genitive today? Apostrophe S. Unless it's it, in which case we don't use apostrophe. Okay? Any of the others? Nope. Except for one class of words, pronouns. Pronouns retain much of the case forms. Him, her, his, okay? I, me, my, mine, you, your. Okay? Those are all case differences. Indo-European vocabulary, we've largely been talking about that. You know, there is a common set of words, language words, among all the Indo-European languages. I should have brought in, had too many already. Should have brought in a book I've got in my office. It's called 100, something like 100 principal words in Indo-European languages. And it's a kind of a thesaurus of body parts, natural imagery, tree, sky, cloud, sun, moon, stars. And what the book does is it shows what those words are in all the Indo-European languages. Okay? And body parts, I mean, it goes down to finger, thumb, hand, arm, wrist, elbow, shoulder, chest, leg, knee, shin, toe, nose, ear, eye, mouth, hair, etc. Familial relationships, mother, father, son, daughter, uncle, aunt, niece, nephew, grandmother, grandfather, cousin, all those kinds of things. And what you see is all of these words are closely related. If we take a break, I'll go get it and put some of them on the board. You do have some indications of some of those words in here with the kind of the section on Grimm's Law, and I thought there were a couple of lists earlier on, like the numbers, page 71. You know, for the number 1, Latin unus, Greek ine, Welsh un, English 1, Icelandic ein, Dutch een, okay. German eins, duo, dau, tu, tver, twee, okay. Zwei, tres, tree, three, threer, dria, drei in German. Okay. So, I mean, you can go all the way down, and people have done, you know, for the numbers, they've counted through 100. And it's pretty interesting because they're cognates even for like 77, etc. Right? Now, the division of the languages. You've got now 2 different charts. You've got this one, which is fantastic. I emailed the artist who did this. She's got it's a web comic. And I don't even remember what it's called. I think I sent you I put the link to this page on the website. You could probably go to that and click somewhere on this to get to the original thing. This is fantastic because, it's a very, very nice visual. It's a lot nicer than the one I've given you in the notes. But the one I've given you in the notes is probably a lot easier to remember than this is. I really like this one because it does show you the actual tree-like quality of what we're talking about, which the version down here doesn't quite convey. So let's talk about these and then we'll go back up. Okay? as we said, Indo-European divides into, broadly speaking, two branches, two main branches, the Kintum and the Satem groups. Notice, this division leaves an awful lot out. It doesn't include Armenian, it doesn't include Tocharian, okay, and several others. The main Kintum branches, Celtic, Germanic, Hellenic, Italic, Celtic. The languages spoken primarily, okay, that were spoken primarily in the British Isles. Derivatives today, Welsh, Scots Gaelic, Manx Gaelic, and Irish. Okay? And Breton, which is still spoken in Brittany and France. Germanic, it's all the Germanic languages. Okay? That includes modern English, it includes Afrikaans in South Africa, it includes Dutch, it includes what's called Plattdeutsch, which is lowland German in modern-day Germany, like the German spoken in modern-day Saxony, as well as Hochdeutsch, which is the High German, the German spoken up in the Alps in Bavaria, the German spoken in Norway, in Sweden, in Denmark, and Iceland, and parts of Greenland even. Okay. Hellenic, all the Greek languages, which today there's really only one Greek language, and then Italic. Italian and all of its derivatives, all of its offshoots, okay, the Romance languages. Okay. The Satem group, Balto Slovak, and Indo-Iranian. And we're going to see how these break down even more. Okay. Little note, you need to know these trees for the exam. You won't get a blank tree, but you'll get a tree like this on the exam with blanks in it. You'll have to fill in the blanks. Okay. Look at the Balto Slavic first. And again, these are simplifications. Okay. I even had to update it for this class because from the last time I had taught it, I hadn't made a couple of divisions. So Balto Slavic, Balto means relating to the Baltic countries. So Baltic divides into two groups, Eastern and Western. The Eastern group, Latvian, Lithuanian. Probably should throw on there Estonian, so I don't offend any Estonians in class. The Western group, Old Prussian. Okay. Old Prussian, notice, sorry, there should not be an arrow there. White out that arrow.
Yeah, we don't have one on ours.
You don't? Oh, good. I have no idea how that got there then, because I printed yours from this. That's weird. Okay, so the Western is Old Prussian. Okay, the Slavic group, Old Church Slavonic. This is the language spoken in the Russian Orthodox Church in church services only. Okay, this is not the language spoken by Vladimir Putin. Putin knows Old Church Slavonic, okay, because if you go to a Russian Orthodox Church, if you are Russian, you have to know Old Church Slavonic because, again, that's the only thing spoken in the Divine Liturgy or in the Vesper services, etc. Old Church Slavonic, we can date fairly well in terms of its written form, because the written form was produced when two Greek missionaries went to the Baltic lands. They brought Christianity, and in the year 988, Vladimir I adopted Christianity for the Rus. Okay? At that time, it was in Kiev, which is modern-day Ukraine. Okay? And the language, Old Church Slavonic, is written in what's called Cyrillic alphabet, which was designed by Cyril and Methodius. Cyrillic from Cyril. Old Church Slavonic divides into three groups, three geographical areas, south, east, and west. Okay? The south group, Bulgarian. I have no idea how Serbian got there. Should be Serbian. Bulgarian, Serbian, and Croatian. Okay? 10 years ago, a little bit longer than that, 15 years ago, Serbo-Croatian used to be a single entity, just like 15, take that back, man, I'm getting old. 20 years ago, Czechoslovakian used to be a single entity. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989, these linguistic and nationalistic groups kind of separated more. And they are separate languages. They're not dialects per se. Okay? And then the eastern group, western group, Polish, Czech, and Slovak, or Slovakian. Okay? The eastern group, okay, now notice, think of this, way back up here for a moment. I'm going to go up to the maps. Go to this one. So what we're talking about in terms of the eastern, western, and southern Baltics, okay? Modern day Ukraine is pretty much right in this area because the area of the Crimea that was recently stolen by Russia, that's right about where the X is there. That's the Crimean Peninsula, in fact. So everything from here off this direction is east. Western, modern day Poland, which is over here. Okay. Down. We'll spend some time on Grimm's Law, as you can see. Shrink that down. Western, Polish, Czech, Slovakian. Now, just Russian, where modern Russian kind of descends from Old Church Slavonic. You have what's called Great Russian, what Russians would just call Russian, okay? Belarusian, okay, which people in Belarus, some of them call that Ukraine, some of them don't. It's not necessarily Ukraine, but the Belarus are separate from Ukrainians. Don't like that phrase as much. It's called White Russian. And Ukrainian. Ukrainians do not like the phrase Little Russian because the Ukrainians considered themselves to be the real Rus. Right? Because as I said, Kiev was kind of the founding capital of Ukraine. It's where Vladimir I, who's the first major kind of Russian Tsar, okay, was from. So that's the Balto Slavic branch. These two are closely related. There's a lot of similarities between these groups of languages. Okay, the Indo-Iranian on the other side, Iranic or Iranian if you want, leads to Persian. Modern day, they don't use as much the term Persian as they do Farsi. Okay? Indic leads to Sanskrit and Prakrit. Sanskrit is a religious language. It is a holy language. Okay? Because Sanskrit was used not only for the temple practices and rituals, Sanskrit was also used to record the holy literature of India in. Okay? And so Sanskrit is kind of frozen in time. If you learn Sanskrit today, what you are learning is a language that was spoken literally 800 to 1000 BC. If you learn Latin today, you're learning Latin that was probably spoken sometime between about 100 BC and 100 AD. Unless you go on and do medieval Latin, in which case it's church Latin, and it's kind of all over the place. Okay? Prakrit developed from Sanskrit. Prakrit is the more common, ordinary, everyday form of Sanskrit that people would use in their daily lives. But it wasn't thought of as the holy language. So it could change and evolve. Okay? We've got lots of texts written in Sanskrit by Sanskrit grammarians where they are arguing over usage of particular terms and how particular terms must be used, etc., in the Vedic texts, in the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata and things like that. Okay? From Sanskrit and Prakrit, three main Indic languages: Hindi, Romani, and Bengali. What's Romani? Anybody know? It's the language of the gypsies. Okay? The gypsies are called gypsies in Europe because it was thought when they first appeared that they were from Egypt. They weren't. Okay? Romani is a how do I put this? It's a curious language because although it is related to Indic, it has a lot of things that are separate, that are different than Indic. So we're not exactly sure of the specific relationship there. Okay? Okay, this is the one that's most important. Well, not quite. I was going to say that's most important for us, but the one that's most important for us is the Germanic family tree. This one's still pretty important. So these are the Kintu language branches. These are the Western, let's say, Indo-European groups. Okay? So you have Proto-Indo-European, Celtic, Germanic, Hellenic, Italic. Celtic. Notice, two branches. You can't divide these branches geographically. It doesn't work. Right? These are divided on the basis of a sound in those languages. Okay? Where Goyadelic, which is called Q-Celtic, has a k or k sound. Britannic has a p sound. Okay? Here's an example. Mac fearsome. Okay? You have that k there. Up, Penrith. Okay? The Mac and the Op both mean the same thing. They both mean son of. So anytime you meet somebody whose last name is Mac, Mackenzie, McDougall, McPherson, Simon, whatever, okay, it's son of Dougal, son of Fearson, son of Simon. If you meet somebody from Wales and they've retained their Welsh name, often their name will be Op, A-P hyphen. The AP indicates son of. That's a perfect example of the difference between the P and the Q Celtic. Where one has a P, the other has a K sound. Okay? So, Q Celtic, Scots Gaelic, Irish Gaelic, and Manx Gaelic. Manx from the Isle of Man, between Ireland and England. Okay? P Celtic. P Celtic divides into two geographical areas, but not east, west, north, south. Okay? One is continental, meaning on the European mainland, and one is insular, meaning on the Isles of Great Britain. Okay? Continental, Gaulish, the language spoken in ancient Gaul, okay, and Galatian, as in St. Paul's letter to the Galatians. Okay? Because you have to remember, I won't pull the map back up. You have to remember, in about the mid-first millennium BC, roughly 700 to 500, Celtic ranged from the Atlantic coast side of Ireland, all the way across Europe to Salzburg, for example, Vienna. Salzburg is a Celtic town. The very name itself is Celtic. To Darmstadt, Germany, okay, down the Danube River on the eastern side of Europe, kind of before you get to the Slavic states, what now would be the Slavic states, to modern-day northern Greece and north of Turkey, and included Northern Ireland, and included all of what is today called the Iberian Peninsula, Spain. What's another name that's used sometimes for parts of Ireland and Scotland that is related to the Iberian Peninsula? Hibernia. It's almost the exact same word, okay? And that's because of the Celtic influence there. That's how widespread the Celts were. The only thing is, they never united. You know, if they had united like the Greeks did under Philip of Macedonia or his son, Alexander the Great, the Celts would have had an empire as great as the Roman Empire. But they never did. They had competing chieftains and such. Right? Look at Hellenic. You have Hellenic divides into three branches: Aeolic, Doric, and Ionic or Attic. Attic, Athens. Okay? It's from Ionic and Attic that we get modern Greek. So if you learn Greek today, you're not going to be able to necessarily pick up an old copy of the Greek New Testament and read it. Why? Because Greek's undergone the same kinds of changes that almost all the other languages have. You have to learn what's called Koine Greek, which is common, everyday, ordinary New Testament Greek. Okay. Italic, again, three branches: Oscan and Umbrian. They die out. Classical Latin, which devolves into Vulgar Latin. Vulgar doesn't mean dirty or rotten. All it means is common. It's the common language spoken by everybody. Vulgar Latin gets spread primarily via one group: soldiers. Because what is Rome doing? It's sending troops out. It's sending garrisons out to protect the provinces. Okay? And those speakers, or those troops, speak common, ordinary, street Latin. Okay? Out of Vulgar Latin, the Romance languages are born. Okay? French, Spanish, Roman, Romanian, Italian, Portuguese. Okay? Which is why, if you learn Latin well, take 2 years of Latin, picking up a Romance language is not that difficult. Okay? Because the grammar of the language is essentially the same. Yeah, you have inflectional endings that have changed. You have word forms that have changed. You do have some sound law changes. Okay? But once you know what those are, you can look at it and go, oh, okay. Same thing applies to German. Okay? If you were to learn, not that we have classes on everything, if you were to learn, for example, Gothic, not people dressed in black, the Gothic spoken by the Goths in the lower Danube, in the area around the Balkans in southeastern Europe. Okay? If you learned their language and learned it well, you would be able to pick up almost any Germanic language fairly easily. Similarly, if you learn Old English, right, and you understand the sound changes that occur between Old English and what happens to the Germanic languages on the continent, the sound changes that occur, say, between the German spoken on in Germany between 800 AD and the German spoken in 1200 AD, and then the German spoken in 1500 AD, you'd have no problem learning modern German. If you know Old English, modern German is easy, as is Dutch, Flemish, right, Afrikaans, etc. So, classical Latin gives you all those. And then this is the big, I mean, you need to know everything on this chart, okay, on this tree. So, Proto-Indo-European gives us Proto-Germanic. That is, the people who become the Germanic speakers break off at some point, and there are none of the other language groups speaking in this group. Okay? So you don't have any Indic speakers, you don't have any Proto-Baltic speakers or anything. These are all people who are only going to be Germanic speakers. This divides into 3 geographical locations: East Germanic, North Germanic, and West Germanic. Right? So, East Germanic, imagine a map of Northern Europe. You have Germany and Denmark sticking up, and then the coastline goes around, it goes all the way up eventually to Finland. Finland's not Germanic. Okay? But connected to Finland, sticking down kind of like another finger, is Sweden. And then Sweden comes back up, and sticking down another finger is Norway. Okay? What separates Sweden and Norway is a mountain ridge up here. All right? So, the eastern groups are Gothic. Again, as I said, spoken primarily in the Balkans initially. Okay? And then it moves up north. And Vandalic and Burgundian. And then from Gothic we get Visigothic and Ostrogothic. It's the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths that invade and sack Rome. Right? Now, we have quite a bit of written material in Gothic. It's all New Testament translation. A 4th century bishop by the name of Wulfilas, Wulfilas, pretty sure it's in your book, translated passages of the New Testament into Gothic. To do so, he had to create a written language for it. Okay, so he created an alphabet for Gothic. We have, for Vandalic and Burgundian, very little surviving material. We have some laws. Okay? Both of those languages are spoken in what is today modern parts of France and parts of Germany. Okay? The area of France today called Burgundy comes from Burgundian. Okay? We have names that come from those peoples. Pretty important names in terms culturally. For example, Richard Wagner in his Ring cycle mentions Brunhild. That's a name from Burgundian, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly. Okay? Look at the North branch. Okay? Old Norse, some people don't like to use that term. They would prefer something like Old Icelandic, but it's not Icelandic per se. Some will call it something like Old Common Germanic. I use Old Norse because it's simple. And you can still buy books titled An Introduction to Old Norse. Right? So if you want to learn this language, which is the language primarily of the Vikings, right? You can. Old Norse divides into 2 groups, West Norse and East Norse. East Norse, if you think of that map again, it's the Danish peninsula in Sweden. Okay? West Norse is Icelandic, and then Faroese and Norwegian. And yet, this kind of representation is a little bit misleading. If we were to try to, do this kind of representation and show how the language kind of flowed, moved, you'd show Norwegian first, and then an arrow kind of off to Icelandic and Faroese, because the Icelanders came from Norway. Right? They settled from Norway, as did the people on the Faroe Islands. Okay? Norwegian gives you modern, what's called Dano-Norwegian, and New Norse. New Norse is just new Norwegian. Okay? If you can read Norwegian, modern Norwegian, you can get by with Old Icelandic or Old Norse. Again, some sounds have changed, some spelling things have changed, but you can get by. I can read some Old Norse, and I can, with a dictionary, I can make my way through Norwegian and even some Swedish. Not very well, but okay. Go up to the top again. The West group. Okay, these are the West Germanic languages. These are divided not well, it is kind of geographically. It's topographically by elevation. High German is the German spoken in southern Germany in the Alps. Low German is what's also called Plattdeutsch. P-L-A-T-T. Right? Notice the P there. It's flat German. Okay. The High German is Hochdeutsch. High German. H-O-C-H. In case you're interested. High German gives us Yiddish, kind of the international language of Jewry, Jews, okay, which is a mixture of Hebrew and German, and then modern High German. Okay. The Low Branch, the area in northern Germany around the Baltic Sea, Saxony and such, that gives us 4 branches. Okay? Gives us Old Saxon, which leads to modern Low German. And I'm not sure, for example, if it's modern Low German or High German that Angela Merkel speaks. I'm betting it's probably High German. I don't know what Berlin would be. I'll have to ask my sister-in-law because she lives in Germany. Frisian. Frisian is a collection of islands along the northwest coast of Europe, north of Denmark. If I'm a map and you're facing me, Denmark kind of sits up like this, Sweden juts down like this, and then Norway comes down. So you have Denmark, and then the coast goes along like this. There's a group of islands here, okay, called the Frisian Islands. It's a separate language. English, of all the Germanic languages, modern English is probably closest to Frisian than any other Germanic language, for the simple reason of how Britain was settled by the Germanic tribes. They didn't just hop in a boat and sail over. What they did was they hopscotched along the coast. So Frisian, what's called Old Low Franconian. And Old Low Franconian gives us modern Dutch and Flemish and Afrikaans. Afrikaans actually should be derivative from Dutch. Okay? And then notice English over here all by its lonesome. And we could do with this, we could put Old English, line down, Middle English, line down, Early Modern English, line down, Modern English, American English, Australian English, and we could follow those kinds of tracks everywhere, but we're just going to put it in one big group here. Okay? Let's go back up here. I think we're going to take a break before we go into Grimm's Law and all the Germanic characteristics. Yeah, let's take a break. I've got just about 7:20, so let's come back at 7. Be back by 7:30.